Look at that, that's the power of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And that's not something which is hidden, that's something which is history. So in this way, 2007, this man comes, Hindu, grabs onto the flag of Abu Fadl and he says, look, I've heard from my ancestors, regardless of the fact that whether we're Hindu or not, we don't need to be Muslims because we know that you're for everyone. Grabs on and he says, oh Abbas, give me a son. And now he gets emotional. You know, sometimes we get emotional. He says, Abbas, give me a son. If you give me a son, I'll bury you in his way. I'll sacrifice you in his way. And he said it and he left. 9 months later, Allah gave him a son. This is within our generation, not 1,000 years ago or 200 years ago. Within our generation, 6 years ago, Allah gave him a son. You know what he says? He says, that night when Allah gave me a son, I realized why he gave me a son. But I also realized my promise that I'd made to Abu Fadl. He says, fine. What should I do? He says, but after 10 years, Allah's given me a son. He says, no, but I'm from the warrior caste. A man is known by the promises that he makes. He says, fine, I made a promise, I'm going to fulfill that promise. He says, he lifted up the child, and at dead of night, without his mother knowing, he leaves the house. And as he leaves the house, he goes out towards the outskirts of the city where there was a desert. And he goes there, child in his hand, comes close, takes a shovel, starts digging with his own hands. And he digs, and he removes, and he makes a small grave. And tears are in his eyes, and his heart is bursting. And he's thinking to himself after all of these years. But he said, look, I remember that I made a promise, and I'm going to fulfill that promise. He takes the baby, he puts him into the ground, he takes the dirt, and slowly he begins to chuck the dirt on the face of the baby. And the baby is suckling, and the baby is moving, and you can see the love the baby has for his father. It's his natural love. Heavy-hearted, he somehow buries the baby, and as he buries him, he begins to walk. And when he begins to walk, he says, I'd heard that Sayyid al-Shuhada walked 7 times from the tent. He says that as I was going to the door of the house, I stopped and I walked to the front of the street again, and again I walked, and again I walked, and again I walked. He says, there was one thing in my mind. What am I going to say to the child's mother? He says, eventually I picked up the heart. I opened the door and I went inside. And as I went inside, I saw the mother was sitting there with a child in her hand. So I looked at the mother and I said, you disgraced me, woman. He says, why? What did I do? He said, you followed me. He says, no, I didn't. I didn't even know. He says, how'd you have the child? You know what she says? She says, half an hour after you left, there was a knock on the door. When I opened the door, there was a very tall man standing there. The tall man looks at me, he opens up his shawl, and he gives me the baby, and he says, tell your husband, what we give, we don't take back. That's Sayyid al-Shuhada. That's Abu Fadl al-Abbas.